This is True Crime Arizona, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.
Hi, everybody. It's Briana Whitney here, host of the True Crime Arizona podcast. I'm with our investigative reporter, Morgan Lowe. Big day for Zombie Hunter trial. We know you've been with us for months and months as this has unfolded in a courtroom. And finally today, Tuesday, April 11th, we got a verdict.
Yeah, and it came down pretty quickly. The jury, which is the judge, got the case last Thursday.
Yeah, that was closing arguments.
Then Friday, Monday, verdict today. And before we get into what the verdict was, we should set the scene for you because this was unlike any other courtroom I've been in where everybody gathered for a verdict, because normally you have a jury and the victim's family members are there and it's so tense. And this one, there were a few more people there than are normally there for testimony in the audience section, in the gallery. But you had the attorneys who all know each other very well and are talking beforehand. Bryan Miller came out, he was talking to his attorneys. The judge came out a few minutes early and chit-chatted, and then they started early. It was supposed to be read at 2 p.m. They started, she said, is everybody ready? It was 1:57, and then they went into it.
I mean, it felt pretty casual watching it. And I know we want to play the sound of that moment when Judge Suzanne Cohen read the verdict. Now, we've talked a lot about the first-degree murder charges, but there were also charges on the table of kidnapping and attempted sexual assault. She read the verdict in all three charges, so we're going to play that out for you in full now.
2015-102066-001, count 1, first-degree murder. The court, the finder of fact, in the above entitled action, upon my oath, finds the defendant as to count 1, first-degree murder, Angela Brasso, as follows. Guilty. In the Superior Court of the State of Arizona, in and for the County of Maricopa, count 2, first-degree murder, the court, the finder of fact, in the above entitled action, upon my oath, finds the defendant as to count 2, first-degree murder, victim Melanie Burness, as follows. Guilty. Does the parties waive reading the caption for the remaining counts?
We do, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Verdict, count 3, kidnapping. The court, the finder of fact, in the above entitled action, upon my oath, finds the defendant as to count 3, kidnapping, victim Angela Brasso, guilty. Count 4, kidnapping. The court, the finder of fact, in the above entitled action, upon my oath, finds the defendant as to count 4, kidnapping, victim Melanie Burness, guilty. Verdict, count 5, attempted sexual assault. The court, the finder of fact, in the above entitled action, upon my oath, finds the defendant as to count 5, attempted sexual assault, victim Angela Brasso, guilty. Count 6, attempted sexual assault. The court, the finder of fact, in the above entitled action, upon my oath, finds the defendant as to count 6, attempted sexual assault, victim Melanie Burness, guilty.
Guilty of all of the charges. And I think what struck me about the judge reading that was monotone, sterile, guilty, 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 guilty. These are huge charges against Bryan Patrick Miller that he's now convicted of, yet there was really no feeling, no emotion, no dramatics at all when this was read. Morgan, you were sitting in there. What was your takeaway from the mood as everybody learned his fate?
Having covered other big court cases in the past, and certainly having seen plenty on television, whether it's real ones or fictional ones, you expect this, like the gasp, and you expect the tension to be palpable to be able to feel it. And in this one, it was really, there was tension in the beginning because you didn't know how she was going to go on that first one. And, you know, once she said guilty of first-degree murder in the Brasso case, you knew it was over. It was game over. And so it was, as you and I were saying, it was anticlimactic. People who were in there seemed to have thought that this was going to be the case. I was talking to some of the other reporters. They said they'd probably be surprised if it was not guilty by reason of insanity. But it was guilty. It was silent. Nobody made a peep. You could hear the judge very clearly. Bryan Miller looked straight ahead. And if you haven't seen the video, to tell you that he always wears this black suit and he has this big like COVID mask on and his glasses. So you can't really see his face. You can't see any expression, but he didn't move at all. And so I don't know what his expression was, but I know that he wasn't like physically, visibly reacting, and he certainly didn't audibly react at all.
And there were no family members in the courtroom. Now, when we're talking capital murder cases that we've both covered, typically the families of the victims are there. Family, friends, loved ones. That's where you end up getting a lot of tears, a lot of almost like a sigh of relief, depending on what a verdict is when we're talking about a case of this magnitude. Do we know if the family members were watching virtually? Do we know why they weren't there for this big day after so many months?
So we do know that the family members were dreading having to relive what happened all this time ago. We know that at times, if not the whole time, at least at times, they have been logging into this virtual login where they can watch from a camera in the front. They can watch the proceedings and listen to the proceedings. I will tell you that sometimes when they're logging in and out or people are logging in and out, you can hear this noise going on over a speaker there. And I did hear that noise clicking in a couple of times today, clicking in and clicking out. So I don't know if they were in. I'm going to assume that they were watching. I'm going to assume also that they'd been watching some of it. I have heard from people who know the family members that at least for parts of it, they have been keeping tabs on what's happening. I did speak to somebody who was there today, one of these three women who have been there off and on throughout the trial. They know the family, and they've sort of been helping the family keep tabs on what's going on here sort of live. And they said that they were going to ask if they had a statement to make, if they wanted to release a statement. We haven't heard anything yet. We haven't caught any statement from them yet. But yeah, that's the extent of the amount of information we have about the family today, although there is one other piece of information about the family that we'll get to in just a minute.
Right. It's rare that we don't know how a family feels after not only a huge verdict like this, but also 30 years in the making. You have to assume this is at least one step forward in terms of closure for the Brasso family and the Bernas family, who have lived for years and years without the two of them now, waiting to get to this point in court. So the judge not buying the not guilty by reason of insanity defense that Bryan Patrick Miller's attorneys put forward. You know, we had mentioned in the closing arguments that R.J. Parker, the defense attorney, really set up this scenario that there were two versions of Bryan, that the one who committed the crimes didn't know what he was doing was wrong, and that's not the same Bryan that is here now. And while you and I said, you know, we thought R.J. Parker did a good job kind of running it home for his side of this and trying to convince the judge of that, I don't think she wasted any time even contemplating that. I mean, she seemed like she knew that she felt that he was guilty. Did you get that feeling that the judge had a good sense going into this, that after everything she had heard, this is how she felt?
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the rules are, the judicial rules for a bench trial, but I know that she has been keeping up on this. She has been, it's not like she's just been sitting there listening throughout the trial and then saying, well, I'll look at everything at the end. You have to think by the way she's been talking, how, especially toward the end when they were having conversations with the lawyers about testimony that some of the psychologists has made, she showed in that last week that she really was aware of everything every psychologist spoke about. So I think she did listen to every argument and made that decision. And I think the fact that it only took 2 days of deliberating probably means that she just had listened to everything and had made up her mind after looking over everything again. But she is a former prosecutor. She's a former prosecutor who prosecuted at least one serial killer, the baseline killer. She doesn't suffer fools. And today it was all business. And then as soon as they were done with the, this is the verdict, it's move on.
Yeah.
And move into what's next.
Right. Yeah. So that I was very matter of fact, right? Okay. Verdict done. Next step. Now, as if only it was that easy of next step and we can finish this really quickly. That is not what we're expecting. So we move into the penalty phase, this aggravation phase, where basically now the prosecution and the defense will try to convince the judge what they believe Bryan Patrick Miller's fate should be, his sentence, whether he's sentenced to death, whether it's life in prison, whether it's a certain number of years behind bars. So what can we expect from like a mini trial that the two sides will now present to Judge Cohen again?
Yeah, so for the next 2 days, for the next day or two, there's going to be this aggravation mitigation section where they argue basically about what should be included as an aggravating or a mitigating factor. And this is going to be a lot of legalese for the next 2 days. And once that is set, and they'll have a closing argument for that. Once that is set, then they go into what we consider the penalty phase is, and that is going to be the prosecutors. They said that they are not going to bring any witnesses in, but they are going to have victim impact statements. And they said today that family members of the victims, some of them are still writing these victim impact statements. I don't know if the family members are going to read them in court. I sort of assume by the way that Vincent Bordino characterized it today that he or the other prosecutor, Elizabeth Reamer, are going to read them. But they have these statements from family members and friends of the victims that will be read to the judge. Then the defense, they're going to have, I think they said 26 witnesses.
Yeah, stark difference from prosecution calling no witnesses.
Right, and they will tell the judge why they think that it should be life in prison rather than the death penalty. They could, tell the judge nice things about Bryan Patrick Miller. They could also talk about mitigation things, things that happened in his life that made him the way he was. Not really rehashing what we went over in the regular trial, the guilt or innocence phase. But these will be other people just talking about basically asking the judge for leniency for Miller. And I don't know, it's possible that Miller might even testify in his own behalf here. He's already guilty. I don't know if they've made that decision. It is possible. But this will be sort of a mini trial now for the next month to decide what to do with him. We did get a statement from the defense team this afternoon or this evening, and they said that they are going to be asking the judge for life in prison. And he said that there have already been enough deaths in this, and we don't need another one.
So, Bryan, no matter what, he will be behind bars for the long haul here. It's interesting whether he'll take the stand or not. And what makes that even more interesting is we just haven't heard him talk much at all. Even in our research of videos, of interrogations, things like that, we just haven't heard him speak a whole lot.
We haven't seen him look like a regular human. He comes in, let me set the stage for you in the courtroom. It's a pretty big courtroom. The defense table is on the right, and about 5 feet from the defense table is this door. And the door comes in from the sort of captivity area. And Bryan Miller walks in, he takes 4 steps, and he sits down. And then he sits there, and he might look around a little bit and talk to the lawyer, and he writes sometimes, and he has paperwork with him. Then he gets up and he leaves. Today, after the verdict, he had to go up and I believe sign the verdict forms. So he got up and he walked to the front. It's the most we'd seen him move around. And then he was interacting with his lawyers up there. And it was the first time that I saw him where he looked like a regular person up there. And a couple of the other lawyers who sit behind the first and second chair defense lawyers who've sat there the whole time went up and sort of patted him on the back and looked like they were giving him words of encouragement. But patting him on the back. And that was sort of the most I've seen him look like a regular person. And then within 5 minutes, he was out the door. And tonight, he is going to bed as a convicted killer for the first time in his life. That is a change in status with a distinction. At the end of the hearing today, the judge said, he's non-bondable. Now, he hasn't been bondable before, but now that he is convicted, he's officially non-bondable. He is in jail and will stay behind bars.
So there's so much more to come on this because of that. And we will bring you all of that as this unfolds, because oftentimes victim impact statements are extremely powerful. It's sometimes the first we hear from family members in a case. And of course, especially if he takes the stand himself, we will also be bringing that to our listeners as well. So stay with the True Crime Arizona podcast. We know this was a big day today in the trial. It's one step closer to the final end of all of this. And you'll always find the best information here as we stay up to date with what's unfolding. So thank you, everybody, for sticking with us through the verdict, and we'll be sure to see this thing all the way through with all of you who have been on this journey of the Zombie Hunter trial with us. True Crime Arizona, the podcast, is hosted by me, Brianna Whitney.
And me, Morgan Lowe. It is a production of 3TV, CBS 5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.
This is True Crime Arizona, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.